class, I'm going to post the recording online so they'll have it. And for any one of you, by the way, I don't mind recording these lectures, and then I'll post them later. You could see them, and if you miss something, you can watch them again in your free time. So Communication Between Cultures is a great book. I have used a number of books. This one is my most recent favorite, let's put it that way. I've come to know about this book a while ago, but I haven't had a chance to use it yet. At a different university where I taught this course, they kind of wanted me to use the particular book that they wanted to use, and they didn't want to change it. And I really wanted this book, and so now that I got a chance to use this book, I get to use it. I'll tell you why I like this book. It's written in a very broad and a very generic fashion. It speaks to a lot of people on a lot of different levels, and it is modern. Okay, there are a lot of communication books out there that are really outdated. Okay, this one is modern. They keep it updated all the time. They keep changing the contents of the book as people move through history, and that makes a big difference. Okay, so this book is being constantly updated, and I like that, because something that I absolutely hate doing is teaching a bunch of material that is no longer relevant and is outdated, and using examples that don't connect to people's lives today. This book is up to date, and that's why I like it. So it raises all the important issues I want them to raise, but it also does it in a contemporary fashion. And so I think you will appreciate that as well. Now, keep in mind, we're going to move through it pretty fast, and some chapters you might get challenged a little bit, but because it's quite a bit of reading. On other chapters, you will breeze through them really fast, or we break them up in two. Like I said, some of the more significant chapters will break them up in two. But as far as the content goes, it's not a difficult read. It's not a really complicated book. I think most of you will enjoy it because it's written in a very accessible language. Sometimes the authors do use terminology that you might have to look up, but I think that's not the case all the time. I think occasionally you might run into words you don't know. But overall, I think they use a very simple, accessible language. Okay, so that's always good. And feel free to ask me questions as well if you run into something. Obviously, you can always Google things. You don't use me as your personal, dictionary or Google Assistant, but if something comes up and you say, I really don't understand this idea or concept behind this, then you're welcome to bring that forward, and I'd be happy to discuss that with you. All right, so as I said, I'm very fond of the book. I think as you begin reading it, you will appreciate it more and more. You can learn a lot from this book. And in this first chapter that I'm going to introduce, and then after just a little while, we'll take a break. In this first chapter, the authors begin a conversation with us on globalization. We're a global society. The chapter is called Intercultural Communication, a Requirement for Interdependent Global Society. And before I get into this chapter content, I want to ask you guys a question. And the question is this: what example can you think of right now that is truly relevant to our situation at this very moment, where this idea of interdependent global society is coming and touching our lives in a very tangible way? What do you think? When we speak of interdependent global society, can you think of an example of how we are being affected by being members of an interdependent global society right now? Anybody? Just jump in. Give me a point.
I think the most important in these days are the traders and commerce between the countries. And the supplies, we need supplies from China, from India, from Brazil, and I think all needs for everyone in this moment.
Okay. So what you're saying, Mateus, is that our interdependence globally is reflected through our trade, that we depend on each other for different goods, and so we trade internationally, and of course that does show interdependence. There's
Yeah,
something some of our countries don't produce, and we rely on other countries to produce it for us.
yes, like food supplies from to United States. I read in this book uh, maybe more than 40% for the fresh vegetables or
Yeah,
fruits is coming from other side.
exactly. So yes, great. That's one of the example of how we are interdependent as a global society. Anybody else?
Yes, adding to what Matteo said, right on the beginning of the pandemic, I
Yeah.
was listening to NPR and they were having issues, talking about an issue about like
David just fell out. His microphone is muted. All right, maybe he'll come back. There you
it's bad.
go. Yeah, you're back.
Okay, so on the NPR they were discussing the issue that the automobile industry here didn't have enough parts
Mm-hmm.
for maintenance from Chevrolet and other American companies because these parts are produced in Mexico, and
Right.
Mexico was when in quarantine, starting the quarantine, and they were trying to negotiate with the government how to make at least the automobile industry get back to work to supply the chain here. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great example how we are interdependent. So no automobile parts because so many parts are being made in Mexico. That's right. That's excellent. All right. That's a good example, David. Anybody else wants to jump in? What are some of the other examples of that shows our interdependence as a global society?
I think it's during this COVID-19 is a pandemic. Well, actually, we thought that it's one of the big, issue only in China, but it's spread all around the world. So, but then each country dated the COVID-19 the data, and they shared the medical treatment and the data for the COVID, and then so they share all of the medical issues, any other the materials, what they just have, around the countries. So I think it is a good example for the interdependent global society is to share the medical measurement, any data about the COVID-19 pandemic in the
Okay.
world.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Yun. So
You're welcome.
you are highlighting something that's on my mind, as I think about how we're interdependent. Well, here we are in this situation, having to do this class, through Google Meet. I mean, for some people, this is completely new. I've been doing this for years. I've been working in, distance education and online education for many years. But for many people, this is the first time they're taking a class by sitting in front of a computer screen and watching videos of other people moving on their screen. So this is an example of how interdependent we are. If one country, there's something that happens like a terrible disease, and then it gets spread to another country and another country and another country, and then the whole world is sick with the same exact disease. If we don't think we're interdependent, then we're fooling ourselves. If one country gets sick with some sickness, they're going to give it to another country. We can't keep it to ourselves, and so sickness, of course, and pandemics and diseases and viruses is only one example of how this interdependence works. Okay, and so there are other things that the book highlights, but I think we already get it. We already understand it just by being in the situation and where we are today. So why is this important? Why is this idea of global society and globalization is important in the area of intercultural communication? Because the truth is that we are dependent on each other in a variety of different ways. And because we're dependent, we have to communicate with each other because we need something from each other. Whether it be goods, like Mateusz said, or car parts, as David noted, or cooperation in the medical field. We need to share data about this virus. For whatever reasons, we need to communicate, and not everyone communicates the same way. I mean, I'll tell you this: Chinese government is still not sharing all the information that they have on a virus. They're still covering things up. They won't even report the accurate number of deaths or recoveries. Will this data help the medical community? Yes, but their culture is that they don't want to share that information because that information will make them look bad. So they don't want to share it. Well, yeah, that's going to make you look bad, but it's going to save lives of people. So why not? Well, they can't bring it themselves to share the truth. So they cover up. And everyone in the world community knows that the numbers about how many people die from this disease and what exactly happens is not truthful coming out of China. And so some other countries do the same thing. They don't always report everything. So there are some countries and some cultures and some societies that are a little bit more open, and they will share this information, where other societies, because of who they are, because of their culture, they're more closed. They don't want to share that information. Why? Because it reflects on them in a way in which they're not comfortable with it, okay? And that comes down to culture. So you could see immediately how our communication and our culture are connected, and how we struggle with understanding each other or even receiving the information from each other that we desperately need, and how that can hurt us, essentially. So you get the idea. We are interdependent in many ways, and we must communicate. It's not an option for us not to communicate, because we are connected. If something happens in China, it in the end affects us here in US, it affects us in Brazil, it affects us in Europe, wherever we are. So not to communicate is not an option. But when we do communicate, we communicate imprecisely. We communicate badly. We communicate sometimes in a very wrong way. We come across to each other in a wrong way because our values are different, because our cultures are different, because our expectations are different, our notions about the world, our worldview is different. And this is where learning other people's cultures and how they communicate helps us tremendously, because we avoid making some of the common mistakes in communicating, and thus, getting ourselves more in trouble because we need each other. But then we have a hard time connecting in the right way. And so communicating from person to person is hard. You know this. People sitting in the same room sometimes have a hard time communicating. People who share the same exact culture have a hard time communicating. Husbands and wives who live in the same house under the same roof have a hard time communicating. Parents and children have a hard time communicating. Now, if people who are so close to each other and they share culture and they share space and they share their life, they have a hard time communicating with each other. Now imagine how much harder it is to communicate with somebody who's nothing like you, somebody who lives far away, someone who doesn't think like you, whose life is so different, and so it becomes harder. And that's the challenge of intercultural communication, is how do we cross these barriers? How do we transcend that sort of difference that we have? It's not easy, I'm going to be honest with you. It's not easy to do. Can we do it? Yes, we can certainly become better at doing it. We may not become 100% successful, and we may not do it well every single time. but there are certain principles and ideas that we can learn that can help us become better. And that's what this book is about. That's what this course is really about. It's becoming better communicators because we become more aware of how culture affects the way we communicate. Okay? So we need effective communication in this world. And that's what we don't have a lot of times. We communicate, but we communicate badly. Okay? And communicating badly does not give us what we need. It doesn't gain us that type of cooperation or the result that we're looking for. Because the truth is we communicate because we need something. Okay? That's the truth. Communication by its nature is utilitarian. And being effective, the only way we can do that is to be very conscious of how we come across to somebody else. And across cultures, that becomes very difficult task. Okay, so the authors in this textbook, in chapter 1, on let's see, pages 1 and 3, they talk about the requirement of intercultural cooperation. They raise this big topic of us, basically we have no options not to communicate and not to cooperate across cultures, and a lot of times across countries as well. There's a lot of problems that we have in this world that we cannot solve in our culture alone, because we're not alone, because we are interconnected. If we solve the crisis in one country and that crisis goes on in another country, we're not really solving that crisis, because it will come back to us anyway. It'll just circle right back and it will affect us. In the end, what's affecting one culture in one country will affect another culture in another country. Now, sometimes people can insulate themselves to a degree, but I don't think we are able to insulate ourselves today as much as we have been in the past. In the past, the society that we lived in was much less connected than it is today. Today, we're interconnected on so many levels that it is almost impossible for us to become completely self-sufficient and cut off from everybody. It just becomes impossible. I mean, it's just, there are many things that we face that can only be dealt with cooperatively. Okay? And that's what this section in this in the textbook talks about in chapter 1. It actually gives you a couple of charts here that talks about what areas of intercultural cooperation we must face. We have social challenges, we have ecological concerns, we have humanitarian and legal cooperation that needs to exist between countries. We have political questions that need to be resolved, again, internationally, and security issues. And none of these areas we can afford to go at it alone, because if one country or one culture succeeds in that area, the other culture or the other country will still affect it. So so this is something that needs to be solved and resolved on a much broader level. Okay. So the rest of the chapter really talks about these types of challenges that we face, and it lists them. Like social challenges, for example. What are social challenges? What are the types of things that affect us on a social level? Well, one thing is population growth. Think about it. We're living in a world that has the highest population it has ever had. Okay, and we are becoming overpopulated in some areas, and that is affecting people. There are shortages of resources because how many people we have living in one area at the same time. That's a social challenge. Cities become bigger, okay? More crowded. We have migration that happens. How many people do not live and work in the country in which they originate from. A whole lot of people do not live and work in the countries in which they originate from. We migrate. Now, these are new things. If you go 100 years back in history, that really hasn't happened, not on the scale on which it's happening right now. Okay? Simple things like ability to get on an airplane and travel thousands and thousands of miles in just a matter of hours actually did not exist 100 years ago. Nobody did it. Nobody got on a plane and went halfway around the world in a matter of hours. Today we do that. So we have social challenges like the growth of our cities and the migration and population growth that we can only solve by cooperating, because it's no longer just America. It's no longer just Korea. It's not longer just Brazil. It's all the countries that are dealing with that, because guess what? Americans are living in Brazil and Brazilians are living in America, and we have to deal with each other and how to get along and how to work together. And so these issues can only be solved cooperatively. But if we are to approach them, we're going to have to communicate. And if we are going to communicate, we will make a lot of mistakes, because a lot of times we will misunderstand and will be misunderstood, because we're not mindful enough of the cultures that we cross, the cultures that are not like us, whoever we may be. Okay, so globalization and development that we're experiencing right now really brings a lot of social challenges. There's some good statistics that this book gives that I'm not going to go through, but we have huge issues that deal with that have to be dealt on a global scale, because our world is becoming so overpopulated. One of the things that the authors mention is the challenge of age, the aging problem. Most countries in the world are experiencing greater number of population over 60. We've never had that many people who are retired. Okay, that means they're not working, and that is a new social problem we've never had before. We always had people who were not working. We always had people who were retired, who are not able to work anymore, but we've never had that many, and that creates a whole new dynamic. Why? Because most countries, at least a lot of civilized countries, a lot of countries that are very developed, they have a social welfare system that allows people to draw on the support of a generation that works. When somebody gets paid pension, when somebody gets retirement benefits, where do those benefits come from? Well, they usually come from those who are still working. But what if the number of people working is less and the number of people working is more? Now, where are we going to get the resources from? We don't have it anymore. We have shortages, and that creates a new social problem. And again, those problems, they overflow from one country to the other. They don't just affect one group of people and not another group of people. Why? Because we're interconnected. Now, I probably don't have to go on forever and talk about other things like ecological concerns. One country polluting, okay, in a very irresponsible way will affect another country right next door to it. I mean, just think about it. If your neighbors decide to make a mess, will that mess not usually affect you? It will. It will overflow. If you own a house with a nice yard and your neighbor decides to stop cutting his grass and his grass decides to grow, as tall as it can be, and it becomes weeds, do you not think that those weeds will go over to your side of the property? Of course they will. If you live in an apartment building and your neighbor doesn't clean and they get cockroaches crawling everywhere, do you not think those cockroaches will come to your house? Of course they'll come to your apartment. Why? Because they find little holes in the walls and they crawl through. And all of a sudden you're going to say, I'm a clean person. I clean all the time. I clean all day long. I don't leave any food out. And I got these cockroaches going everywhere. What do I do with it? You know, I'm inundated by these bugs. You know, little things like that. Now, if that is a problem on our personal level, just living next door to another person, countries experience the same problems when it comes to pollution. When countries dump dirty water into a river, another country that exists downstream from that river has to drink from that river. And they get affected by that because they don't get clean water. They get dirty water. They get trash floating down the river. And now they can't drink from that water. So you can imagine how ecological concerns that we have polluting, whether it be our land or our oceans or our air, it's not something that we even control. It's something that these are resources we share with each other, and therefore they will adversely affect other cultures and other countries. Can we afford not to talk to each other from one country to another about ecological concerns? Can we afford to just ignore the pollution? Not really. Because eventually it will get to us. If we think that, oh, we'll just live and we'll not pollute, we'll have nice and clean country, everything's going to be great over here, everybody else is going to pollute, guess what? That pollution is going to come to you, because this world that we live in, we're sharing, and eventually it's going to get to us as well, which is why the governments get together and they talk about environmental protections and things like that. But not every group, not every government, not every culture, not every society wants to cooperate. And in fact, some of them have different values about the world we live in. They have different understanding of nature and how they see nature. Some people see nature as something that we must take over and dominate, master and control and do whatever we want with. And other people believe living in harmony with nature. And when they see pollution, it just, you know, destroys everything they know and hold to be sacred. You know, so there are cultures who feel differently about ecology, and some of it is cultural. It's not just common sense. It has to do with their worldview. It has to do with how they understand themselves as the part of the world and environment in which they live. So that's another aspect in which we absolutely have no choice not to cooperate across cultures, across countries, across languages, and we must communicate, because if we don't, in the end, it's going to backfire on all of us, and we're going to be in a huge crisis if we don't communicate. We need to solve these problems cooperatively, and that means we have to communicate, and that brings the challenge of communicating across cultures and with people who don't have the same values, that don't have the same ideals and standards as we do, whoever we may be. We're different, and it's okay to be different, but we still need to talk. So it's not about being right or wrong. It's about being able to achieve some sort of a level of cooperation. Okay. So these are some of the things that the chapter highlights. I don't know if you guys want to chime in or anything like that. Are there any examples that come to your mind that particularly pertinent or important in your mind, something that maybe jumps out as we're talking about this, as you're thinking of how our inability to cooperate in these areas is hurting us? Or maybe examples of how we try to communicate and fail, and why we fail in these particular areas, you know, whether it be, you know, ecology, you know, ecological issues that we need to solve, or any kind of social issues that we have to solve. Anybody has any examples? Something maybe going on in the news right now, or something that has to do with these types of levels of communication or failure to communicate across those lines. What do you think? Any thoughts? If you do have something, just open up your mic and speak up. No? I'm going to throw an example for you. United States, a conversation very often in the United States is over immigration. Do you not think that that's a social issue that we have a hard time discussing across culture? Americans have very strong feelings about immigration.
Yes.
Very strong feelings. And they do talk to people. I mean, being a country of immigrants, they still have very strong feelings about that. And they do talk to people, but a lot of times the conversation about immigration brings a lot of misunderstandings. You know what I mean? The way Mexicans, for example, view it is very different from the way Americans view it, right? So things like that.
Different culture.
Yeah, go ahead, Deborah.
Different culture, everything is different.
Yeah. If you ask an average person coming across the border from Mexico who wants to come work in this country, how do they feel about it? What do they think about it? They're gonna tell you their story, and they're gonna tell you how they feel and what they think. You ask an American who lives in a town just across the other side of the border, and they're gonna have feelings, and those feelings are gonna be very different. But they're very real, and they're based on culture, and they're based on their values and how they understand what's right and wrong. But it's just they're going to have a hard time coming together on that issue, right? Part of the reason is because they come from different vantage, they come from different perspective, and they actually embrace a different worldview. Okay, our
different
worldview,
reality.
Go ahead, Deborah.
It's different reality. It's
Different
everything.
reality.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah, it's very difficult for immigrants living here or whatever the country you choose for your life. It's different, it's hard, and everybody need to understand and need to work for everybody feel good and living better. Doesn't matter happiness.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's hard for everybody, not for immigrants, for Americans, or for the people.
It is. But sometimes we need to be able to step into other people's shoes to understand them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I will tell you that, my personal sort of say experience with this is that I love taking people to travel to places that they have never been to. And the reason why I love to do that, and right now I don't get a chance to do that, but in the past, I've had a chance to take groups with me to travel to different places, different cultures, and to experience something they've never experienced before. And that opens up their eyes, it opens up their whole world, and all of a sudden they see somebody else's perspective that they have never met before. And their opinions change often. They would come to me and they say, when I came before, I thought this and this and this and this. But now that I've seen this firsthand, I see it this way and this way and this way. And so a lot of times we cannot come together because we don't experience life with each other and somebody else's life. By experiencing somebody else's life, by being around them, we develop an awareness that creates a greater ability to come together and understand each other. So a lot of times we don't understand each other because we don't communicate at all. We make opinions, we form our ideas completely independently of the other person. And a lot of times we're wrong. We're completely wrong. So in that sense, talking to people and sharing life together, makes it better. It makes us see it from the other side, which is always good. All right, that's good. Good discussion. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm gonna suggest that we take a 10-minute break, and then we can come back and finish this class. So how about this? Don't leave the class. Don't sign out. Simply, just mute your camera, turn off your camera, turn off your mic, and do what you need to do for the next 10 minutes. So let's see. My time says 10:26 right now. 10:26 a.m. So how about in 10 minutes we get back in, okay? And we'll continue class. All right, so I'll see you in 10:36. Okay. So let's take a short break.